This episode is brought to you by 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Engineering. Founded in 1946, this family-owned and operated small-town business has been providing two-way radio technologies to industries across the globe. The 𝗧𝗵𝗲 name has been known for their quality and exceptional customer service for over 75 years. Whether you need remote firing devices for contract blasting, construction, law enforcement, mining, or military, or you need radio remote controls for logging operations, visit their website at www.𝗧𝗵𝗲-eng.com to learn more about the best and most safe, rugged, and reliable solutions available on the market. Hello, this is the Blast Report podcast on all things blasting. My name is 𝗧𝗵𝗲 with New Wave Consulting, and I want to thank all the drill and blast teams along with those supporting them who are out there on the pattern. The production team at Blast Think and I would like to welcome you to today's episode of the Blast Report podcast.
When you are starting out on your own company, when did you decide, okay, I want to keep doing this? Is there, because there's a point where you're like, okay, well, there's a lot of stress when it comes to running your own business, running your own show. You started out as a blaster, and you were managing projects, but now you have to run all the other little side businesses that's involved in running a business. All the other additional paperwork and the taxes and those things that often add a lot more stress. When did you realize, okay, this was the right move? I can run my own safety. I can do all these things. Was there a certain project that you did when you were just very happy because you were like, you know what, this was the opportunity I had. I really got to showcase my knowledge and my work. Do you have a specific project that really highlights for you that situation?
Oh, it would probably get back to the shooting foundations for hydroelectric turbines at what had been Bureau Reclamation dams, that had been irrigation dams, and one in particular, Arrow Rock Dam on the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 River. It had been built in 1915 by the engineer who later built Hoover Dam, and it was his proof of concept of a thin arch concrete dam in a narrow, steep canyon. And it had been built in 1915, and here, about 15 years ago, we did the blasting to put turbines in it. And it was really a grand experience because of how beautiful the dam was and artistically designed, the whole works of it. It's a miniature 315 feet high rather than the 700, but it's a miniature Hoover Dam. And going in there and doing a good job. And I've done, several of these hydro projects, retrofitting them for the same company. Matter of fact, today I'm dealing with that company on another small project that's not a dam, but having done successful work for them over the years, it's nice to give a shout when they've got a critical piece of work. So that was one of them. Doing the project on the Pueblo Dam on the Arkansas River there in Colorado. And by the way, that's how it's pronounced in Colorado. It's the Arkansas, not the Arkansas. But once it crosses the border, it changes name. That matter, and you can get a $25 misdemeanor for pronouncing Arkansas in Arkansas. And you run into history while you're doing this. Not only was the Arrow Rock Dam the proof of concept for the Hoover Dam, the Colorado system, that Arkansas River, was the issue that established supremacy of the U.S. Supreme Court. Because in the year about 1907, I believe it was, the farmers in eastern Colorado were taking so much water out of the river that come harvest time, there wasn't enough water to float barges and stuff down in Little Rock, Arkansas. So they were sued by the states downriver over the use of water, and it ended up being decided that lawsuits between states couldn't be decided by any other than the U.S. Supreme Court. And so that's why we have those big water reservoirs on the upper river there, so that there's always a certain amount of water enough to continue commerce on the lower river during the low water parts of the year. But you run into...
Okay.
Yeah, and it's always interesting out there to learn about the water wars and learn about the, like what was it Mark Twain said in the West, whiskeys for drinking, waters for fighting over.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Actually, the map you see right behind me, on this, well, for our listeners here, we're doing a little video call, but we only record the audio. But the map right behind me, that's the Tennessee River waterways.
Right.
Okay. People always ask me, like, what state is that? I'm like, well, that's the Tennessee Valley and the whole Tennessee River down to the tombigbee, and as it feeds into the Ohio. You're right. You're absolutely right. I think if states are actually, their borders were created around waterways, there'd probably be a lot less fights. This whole world would be a little bit better if
and here
if borders were built by water.
I'm here on the within view of the Columbia River, and that is not just states, but it's international, because it starts up in Canada, and they have a great say about it. And fortunately, I think the renewal of the international pact has just been completed. So it looks like maybe for another 25 years, the city of Portland, Oregon will be safe from flooding, and power generation will continue out here.
So when you do the lake tap, is there a specific? Okay, so as far as I know, you drive a tunnel in through the side of a mountain, and then you get to within 1 or 2 drill steel lengths of the bottom of the lake. Correct?
Well, this one was a little more unique than that. What they're finding is that and it has to do with salmon again. Salmon are a big issue here in the Northwest. But if you have lakes and you get solar heating of the water, just 2 degrees Fahrenheit change at a certain times of the year when the young salmon are traveling can cause the smolts, the little tiny fish that are about the size of your little finger, can cause them to die. So they need cold water to swim in. And the option they needed to cool the entire Willamette River to make sure that they could get this small fish down safely, because all the hydro reservoirs upstream. And the way to get cold water is to get it off the bottom of the lake. So you can either put pumps down, pump water off the bottom, or in this case, it went back into the tunnel that had been drifted as a diversion tunnel when they built the dam, and it had a long concrete plug in it, and we drilled or blasted the plug out. So we were inside and we're blasting concrete. It was on a Corps of Engineers were involved, and I was dragged into the project by Paul Sturck, which was interesting. And then he was able to recommend, and we were able to hire a couple of jackleg drillers, because the entry gates to get into the plug to drill it were 2 feet by 6 feet. So you can change that to meters if you want to. That wasn't very much, because I had to turn my shoulders and duck my head to get through it. I couldn't go through scores. But we had to drill it with jackleg, and did test blasts as we went back, and the way they had it designed, it wasn't absolutely perfect, but I was able to work with the blasting consultant for the Corps of Engineers, Gordon Reevy, who was very helpful on the project. And we did, rather than one test blast and then mechanical removal, we did several test blasts as we moved back, and then did the final. It got it perfected to where we were very comfortable with the idea that the last blast, which was going to tap into the lake, and with almost 90 meters of waterhead, when it tapped, it was a pretty tremendous flow of water came out of there. But
I bet that was an amazing thing to see.
Yeah, it was. And the one of the issues that we had, and one of the reasons for using electric detonators at that time, and this was in the early days of electronics, which have a tendency in close quarters, because you don't have a burning head in them, like the pyrotechnic electrics, you aren't sure that they won't get crushed. Matter of fact, there's a major article in the latest issue of the Blasters Journal. And non-electrics, of course, you can't test. So we put electrics and balance the series out. We had to have 2 detonators in each hole, and they had to be in different series. And doing the math on it, balanced out the series, tested it at the head, added in the lead line, 1,800 feet, was quite a ways back in the mountain. And we were within 1/10 of an ohm on the math at the blasting box. So that tells you things are working right, and it's going to detonate when you set it off, and it did.
And so did you, how long did you say the plug was itself, the concrete plug?
No, I'd have to look it up, but I think the plug originally was about 38 feet long, 12 meters, a little over 12 meters, and we took it off.
So you
about
had
2 meters.
a series of
Yeah.
You had a series of blasts that you had in order to practice, to get to where you were closer. How far was your standoff from the plug or from the end
The last piece
when
was
the
3
pressure
meters.
could break through
The last piece was 3 meters.
in thickness?
Yeah,
That's it.
That was all of it. And that made it,
So
that made
like
the
9
drillers
feet.
kind of
That's it.
nervous. Yeah.
Oh, no joke. Yeah, I would. I bet. And the water was dripping in from every angle.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Whoa, nice. Yeah. That's
And of
definitely
course-
one of
And
those.
of course, then, we got it drilled. I loaded it. Then it took me all night to wire it. I think there were 180 detonators in it, 186, and they had to be made sure they were split in the 4 series and balanced out. And then when I went out, I had to take the ramp off across the lake or the rock track and then go down the ladder and take the ladder out with me. And, I was in there kind of all by myself for hours and hours. Finally trundled out of there and got it ready for the blast. And I'd gone in the evening, and when I came out the next morning to do the shot, there were hundreds of people out there to watch it. All the Corps had people there, the contractor had people there. They were on the rooftop of the powerhouse and all around. And I went, man, this has been a change overnight. But anyway, successful, and everybody was happy about it. And it does work. It cools the river.
Yeah. So you're protecting the
Small salmon.
the species, the small salmon that the migrating salmon they feed on, or after they've been born?
The large salmon come
Sorry,
up.
I know this has
come
nothing
up
to do with
into the small
blasting, but-
streams all over all the small streams along the rivers. They spawn in the small streams, and then when they get to be a certain size and age, they all head back out to the ocean. And they come out of the nice cool water side streams, and then they get into the mainstream of the Willamette. And if they've had a lot of solar heating, it can be too warm for them, and it causes them problems as they head on out. And by having
I understand.
put the valves in to control the water flow through the bottom of the lake, anytime they have a temperature issue, they can open those valves and send colder water into the river and cool it down. And it's a huge reservoir, so they've got a lot of cold water in there. And that, and then the other issue was around dams and dealing with fish. I do a lot of that. We shot the top off the dam at Willamette Falls, part of the top, and put inflatable bags up there that they can deflate when these small salmon are going down the river, and so they can go over the falls like all their ancestors did. Because when you run the smolts through the turbines at the hydro dams, it kills about 90% of them. So if you got 10 dams, you're losing 90% of your small fish at each of them. You don't end up with many fish getting on down there.
Not at all.
That's they had an agreement when the white people came into the country that the natives would allow the white people to have land to farm as long as the Aboriginal people got 50% of the salmon in perpetuity. And here, about 50 years ago, with all the dams and everything, it was having a huge negative effect on things. When the salmon populations and the natives filed a suit, and the response was, well, 50% of nothing, still 50%, so stuff it. And it was called Bolt, B-O-L-D-T. Federal judge said, no, this is an enforceable contract. So you either get it to where the fisheries improve, or you have to get off the land, take the dams out. And they're still fighting over that issue. There's dams on the upper Snake River, not the upper Columbia, on the Snake, the lower Snake, that are still in a huge fight over whether they're going to remove them or what can be done about it, because the Snake River salmon are having a tough go of it. But I've done quite a bit of blasting to improve the salmon reliability or salmon survival. Different dams on the Columbia Dam and up on the Puget Sound area, where they're also working on dams to make sure the young salmon can get downriver safely, as well as getting up fish ladders to spawn.
I got to experience my first fish ladder when I was visiting up by Stevens Pass, Washington, one time. That's where I was born, as a matter of fact. And so I was driving up in that area, Wenatchee, and I saw some of the fish ladders, and just people looking at where they can stop certain types of fish that go up and track, and then they put trackers on them and go back and forth. It's a pretty unique process, but most of those dams are all top fed, so that's why you have to tap down below to get that colder water. Is that when you do that? I know that there have been some studies done on the blasting, and that has a minimal effect on some of the fish, as the shock wave in the water propagates through the water. And how does that, is that acute damage to a fish and things like that? Is that something that you look at a holistic picture, you say, okay, we need to drop the temperature of this reservoir by a drastic amount, by 2 degrees, or else you're going to lose most of the spawn that comes from that at that time frame? Or is there something where you're looking at what are some of the other species that are in that area that are part of that lake? Are they not as important as the salmon, because the salmon's the native species that's coming back and through, and some of those lake species are potentially invasive? Or is that are you studying more than one type of fish there in most of that situation? Or
Well, it depends on where you are. The Klamath levee breach project that we did was to save 2 species of what they called suckerfish that were going to go extinct because they had levied off the shallow area along the lake and turned it into farmland for refugees out of the Czech Republic following the Second World War. And they had farmed there, but after a couple of decades, or 3 or 4 decades of this, they realized that the small suckerfish didn't have the shallows to get into to grow. So they still had adult fish, but the little ones, when they spawn, would get out in the lake in deeper water, and the big fish would eat them. So they needed to have shallows. So that was part of the Nature Conservancy funded a bunch of that and we breached the levees to reflood that area of ground, about 3,000 acres. So the shallows are there again. So the little fish can swim around the reeds and in shallower water than the big fish can get to. And that's been a recovery effort. So we do look at other fish as well. Now, if you're blasting in water, one of the main things you can do to reduce the effects of the overpressure, and especially the underpressure, is to put a bubble curtain around where you're blasting. And when we've taken out the bridge piers in different places, that's what we use. And the Canadian fisheries have done studies on this, and there's a formula for length of hose and depth that it is in the bottom and how much air it takes to run these. But you put a bubble curtain in, and you can drop your pressures in the water 70 to 90% across that curtain. So if you need to drop even more, you can double the bubble curtain. But they are very effective. And the issue is not so much the overpressure at times as the underpressure, because as you are aware, you put out a bubble and then the bubble collapses. And it's that underpressure sometimes will cause the fish bladders to explode inside the little fish, because they are used to being pressurized, and all of a sudden there's no pressure there anymore. They pop out. We did the blasting to deepen the Columbia River channel here within the side of the house, and they did quite a study. They actually put small fish inside cages that they couldn't get out of at certain distances away. And then after the blasting, they would collect them to see what effect the pressures it had on them. And they were far enough away that the majority of them were not killed by the pressure waves, but 100% of them died from knife cuts from the autopsies to see how their bladder had handled it. Trying to figure out at what pressures at distances would cause the bladders to rupture. So, I guess they were scapegoats for Portland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were our little lab rats. So yeah, I mean, I've heard of bubble curtains before. That's really cool. I hope most of our listeners have probably caught a presentation or two of bubble curtains, and the ability to put those at a wide range of depths, and its effectiveness in salt and freshwater is pretty much equal. Is the application when it comes to the under pressure you're talking about, that works similar to like a torpedo, right? When it comes to, once you create that void space, the weight of the ship actually breaks itself into the void, kind of like it's not the pressure of the actual blast, right?
Yep. Yeah, it is.
Similar to the fact that now there's an open spot, and that bladder is now going right into it, correct?
Yep. That's basically the same philosophy.
Is this something that Is this something that has been utilized in other applications of explosives on purpose that you know of?
Well, they had, it's been in use about 100 years, bubble curtains have. And I was doing some reading on it here recently, and part of the ways they would protect harbors and such during wartime was to have bubble curtains around it. It can be, you can put it around your own ships. You know, if you're a surface ship and you want to protect it from shockwave of bombs and stuff going off nearby. So I'd have to dig into that a little bit more and refresh my memory. But yeah, the bubble curtain technology has been around quite some time. Canadian Fisheries and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 did a pretty significant study here about 10 or 15 years ago where they did a lot of measuring and put the bubble curtains out. And it was published in SAE. And it's got the formula on how to put your bubble curtain together and air needs over distance and things of that nature, which I consider to be pretty much the standard of the industry.
That's amazing. And it's something that you need specialized equipment to do. It sounds like it's a fairly manageable process.
No, it's math. Again, it's math. You know, oftentimes it's 2 or 50 millimeter diameter wire wound air hose, like you use on the old air drills, and you figure out your length of it. And there's a formula for the diameter of holes you drill into the hose, and then given the length of it, how much air you need. And I'm looking at a project right now where it's going to take 3,600 CFM or 900 CFM compressor sitting there feeding a manifold to run the air, and that'll take care of several hundred feet of hose around a bridge pier that we need to demolish. So it's just math. It's standard equipment, and using rubber hose levers to flex and lay along the bottom rather than being rigid. It's easier to get in and out of the water.
So any of our blasters could, who are listening, could essentially make their own setup. Is there laws associated with, having to have a bubble curtain on bridge piers and things like that? Or is that depending on the state or the EPA? What's the story with that?
Usually has to do with fisheries. And if you're trying to protect the fisheries, it's there. We did the Blair Bridge in Port of Tacoma, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. They only had 85 adult salmon spawning there anymore, and they definitely didn't want them damaged. That was why they required the piers to be taken out mechanically. That failed, and we had to go in and blast them afterwards. So in order to protect the salmon, we put bubble curtains around it, and we're successful in protecting them. I've done other blasting where we used bubble curtains, and I've also done blasting in water during times when the salmon weren't running and weren't in the area, so there was no concern that there would be such a small number of fish within distance that the under pressure could bother them in this minute or 10 seconds that the blast is going to happen. Why, we'll just go ahead and shoot it. So it's all dependent upon the fisheries.
Okay. And do you find it well, in this situation, the fisheries is your client, right?
No, the fisheries just has great input on getting it permits.
Okay.
Some of the states like Oregon require a special permit from Fish and Wildlife in order to blast in water, in stream crossings for pipelines, or you have to get permits even if you're pile driving in streams that have salmon habitat, because the pile driving will actually cause the gravels to settle and trap the eggs to where they can't hatch properly. So you, in some cases, you have to monitor that and perhaps even put a bubble curtain around where you're driving your piling.
Very interesting. Now, do you say that this has been now one of your specialties within your company, and you look for this kind of work because it's fulfilling for yourself?
Yeah,
I
find it very nice, because the dams were built without ill will. They were to provide power and do other things, but they didn't understand the long-term negative effects some of them might have. So I've helped design the removal of dams that have reached their lifespan, the Condit Dam on the White Salmon River, tributary to Columbia, and then helped with the final piece of the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Dam. Our good friend Jerry Dilley was in charge of that up until he passed, and then I ended up having to go in and do the final bit to make sure that worked. But that's been a grand success. They have huge fish running salmon running up the 𝗧𝗏 again. And it's quite satisfying to be able to go back and either correct old mistakes or improve the situation for the fish here in this part of the world. You know, they're pretty close to being a religious item in parts of it here.
Yes. Yeah, there's value there. And oftentimes when I tell people I work with explosives, everyone's always looking at a destructive, you know, that we make bombs.
They do.
Or that, you know, I work for the military, or there's only a destructive aspect of it. And, you know, this is a nice topic to discuss on how you can use the application of explosives to restore certain habitats. Do you think that you see this application of explosives having a significant impact going on? Are there like your understanding of the amount of dams that have made this negative impact on fisheries and wildlife? Do you think that there's, I wouldn't say an industry, but there's a lot more work to be done on this subject?
Oh yes, yeah. There's work ongoing. There's work in the pipeline, if you will, on retrofitting, putting in fish bypasses of different types. Some of it includes blasting, some of it doesn't. You know, and other technology is coming up where they just use a big pneumo loader to just shoot your fish up over the dam.
I've seen that. Yeah, fish cannons.
And coming up with innovative things and realizing that dams, like other things, have lifespans. And if you get a lot of sediment in them and the reservoir is filled full of sediment, they can't hold enough water to properly generate electricity. And that's the reason one of the dams came out. The other was just such a mess for the fish. And there was no way to, it cost more to retrofit them than just take them out and get your power elsewhere. So it's going to continue to go on. And I'm a supporter of it. It's nice to have both the dams and the fish. You know, I don't want to see it be one or the other. I'd like it to be both, and that's what we're working towards.
Is there like a parting advice that you would like to give, maybe on the subject of, you know, since we kind of focused a little bit more in this episode on salmon and the aspect of protecting the waterways, or maybe something like from your father? You know, you gave us a lot of great advice from your father, some things like that he has said. Do you have any parting advice? It doesn't have to be just one, but that you can kind of give to our listeners and myself here on, you know, a lesson that maybe your father taught us, or that you want to subject on.
Yeah, I'll give you the one. And it's kind of dear to my heart. Number one, if you want good quality employees, you got to pay them enough to live on. You got to pay them a living wage. And I've seen the decline in the earning power of the working class over the last 40 some years. It's just been absolutely atrocious. And,
Agreed.
You know, when you have 50% of the people in the country don't have $1,000 put away for an emergency, you know, and they're working full time, that's not the way to go. And it's across the industry. If you want good people, you have to pay for them. It can't all go to the few at the top. You know, I'm very working class based. Even though I own a small company, I couldn't get the quality of people I need by trying to pay less than my competition is. So that's it in a nutshell. You get what you pay for sometimes.
Very much so. And it's getting harder and harder to find people in this industry, and other people snipe them out from under you.
Was a big promoter of, look, we can't always be going more tech, and excluding our people, because sooner or later you're going to start running out of people. And 10 years ago, the Europeans realized that within a few years they would lose 70% of their expertise. So they started a mentoring and training program. And ours has basically been, well, you old duffer, if you can't get it, we'll pick up the pace, we'll just replace you. Well, there isn't anybody to replace us. And, you know, when you start, my big fear is that you take some of these sharp young people that are in the industry, and they can do the math, they can do a whole bunch of stuff, but how are they going to hold up to, say, a 50-year-old job superintendent telling a 26-year-old kid to pick up the pace because somebody missed something in the estimating and bidding and cut corners? And that's where my big fear is it'll lead to a disaster, and worse, a fatality. And I don't want to see another fatality in the industry. Like, there have been way too many of them to this point already.
That's a very good point. And I've always, seen you be a part of the emerging professionals when that, before that even started. You've always been a big help for a lot of the guys and the younger people in our industry. You've always been a friendly face, a big jolly character, walking around and talking to students and younger members. So I appreciate you, and thank you very much for coming on this show, Jerry. I'm sure we're going to have you back. We've got some more stories of John Wayne and everything else you got. I know there's a shit ton of them. So
all right, Evan, thank you, and enjoy your day, and I expect to see you in Cherokee in January.
Will do. Have a great week, Jerry.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Blast Report podcast. I want to thank the team at Blast Think for producing this show, and please follow along for more episodes in the future, and share this podcast with your colleagues so we can continue to honor our industry and the people in it. Be safe and have a blast.